Here's the background of the company, Dialog Group Berhad. Dialog is a leading integrated technical service provider to the upstream, midstream, downstream sector in the oil, gas, and petrochemical industry. They serve a diverse range of customers that include multinational oil majors, national oil companies, and as well as multinational engineering and service providers located throughout the world. Established in 1984, Dialog has grown both organically and through strategic alliance with internationally renowned technology partners. The vision of this company is to be the leading integrated technical service provider to the upstream, midstream, and downstream sector in oil, gas, and petrochemical industry in Malaysia and internationally. The mission is to continuously enhance competitiveness, competence, and leadership in the provision of the services. And another mission of Dialog Group Berhad is to honor their commitment to quality and timely job completion, as well to the unfailing protection of health, safety, and the environment. There are 5 core values of Dialog Group Berhad, which is integrity, HSE, which stands for Health, Security, Executive, Quality, Competency, and Excellence. The headquarters is in Kuala Lumpur. Dialog is a global player with staff strength about 2,500. Their global footprint include office and facilities in Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, China, Australia, New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Sarah Najiha and I will present about the liquidity ratio. So firstly is quick ratio. How to calculate quick ratio is by current asset minus inventory and we divide it by current liability. So in 2019, the current asset of Dialog Group is 2,215,204 ringgit minus the inventory, which is 95,593 ringgit, divided by the current liability, which is 1,478,933 ringgit. So we get the quick ratio 1.43. In 2020, the current asset is 2,488,786 ringgit minus by the inventory, which is 847,080 ringgit, and divided by current liability, which is 1,474,361 ringgit. We get the quick ratio 1.63. It shows that a higher amount of quick ratio is more favorable because it means that company to pay off its short-term obligation without having to rely on the sale of inventory and prepaid. Thus, Dialog Group show a better improvement in 2020, which is 1.63 to pay off its debt compared to 2019, which is 1.43. So we move on to cash ratio. So how to calculate cash ratio is by cash divided by current liabilities. So in 2019, the cash is 884,403 ringgit divided by the current liabilities, which is 1,478,933 ringgit. So we get the cash ratio, which is 0.60. And in 2020, the cash is 1,240,389 ringgit, while the current liabilities is 1,474,361 ringgit, and we get the cash ratio 0.84. A higher amount of cash ratio is more favorable. This is because it means that the company is able to cover all current liabilities immediately without having to sell or liquidate other assets. Thus, Dialog Group showed a better improvement in 2020, which is 0.84 compared to 2019, which is 0.60.
So here's the leverage ratio of Dialog Group Berhad. The debt ratio formula is total debt divided by total asset will times by 100. So in 2020, the total debt for Dialog Group Berhad is 670,756, will be divided by the total assets, which is 7,190,029. Times by 100, we got 9.33%. And in 2019, the total debt is 789,960 divided by the total asset, which is 6,709,779, and times by 100 we got 11.77%. This show the performance of that ratio of Dialog Group Berhad in 2020 is decreasing compared to 2019. It means that the company had used 9.33% of its debt as its fund for the company compared to 90.67% of the owner's capital. Okay, for the debt to equity ratio, the total debt will be divided by total equity and times by 100. In 2020, the total debt for Dialog Group Berhad is 670,756 will be divided by the total equity in 2020, which is 4,243,750. And in 2019, the total debt is 789,960 divided by the total equity, 3,907,693 times by 100, we got 20.22%. So the contribution is decreased in 2020 compared to 2019. So we conclude that Dialog Group Berhad have less risk in debt financing as its value show less than 100%. For time interest earned, the earning before interest tax will be divided by interest expense. So in 2020, when the earning before interest tax divided by the interest expense in 2020, we got equal to 13.89 times. And in 2019, the interest before tax is 652,996 divided by the interest expense in 2019, 48,107 equal to 13.57 times. So to conclude that Dialog Group Berhad is able to pay the interest payment against the debt. Therefore, it shows that there is a increasing in covering its debt from 2019 to 2020.
The inventory turnover of Dialog Group for 2019 is 19.68 times and for 2020 is 21.09 times. A low turnover ratio shows a weak sales and excess inventory. Thus, Dialog Group shows a weak sales in 2019 compared to sales in 2000. The average collection period of Dialog Group for 2019 is 141.81 days and for 2020 is 102.66 days. A lower average collection period is more favorable than a higher average collection period. A low average collection period shows that the company is collecting the payment faster. Thus, Dialog average collection period is more favorable in 2020 compared to 2019. Next, the total asset turnover of Dialog Group for 2019 is 0.36 times and for 2020 is 0.32 times. The higher the asset turnover ratio, the better of the performance of the company. Thus, Dialog performance is better in 2019 compared to performance in 2010. Continuing to the receivable turnover. The receivable turnover of Dialog Group for 2019 is 2.57 times and for 2020 is 3.56 times. A high receivable turnover ratio can indicate the company's collection accounts receivable is efficient and the company has high proportion of quality customers that are able to pay their debts quickly. Thus, Dialog Group is being efficient in 2020 compared to 2019. Lastly, the fixed asset turnover of Dialog Group for 2019 is 1.83 times and for 2020 is 1.77 times. A higher turnover ratio is indicative of greater efficiency managing fixed asset investment. Thus, Dialog Group shows an efficiency in managing fixed asset in 2019 compared to 2020.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Kalisha Arisa. So now I would like to present about the profitability. In profitability, there are five calculation, which are gross profit margin, operating profit margin, net profit margin, return on asset, and return on equity. For the first one, gross profit margin, as we can see in the year 2020, it's again a high percentage, which is 22% compared to 2019, which is 21%. The higher the gross profit margin, it can say that the company is a good company. which mean the company is good in managing its cost of sale. Okay, for the next is operating profit margin. Operating profit margin is where operating profit divided by sale and also times with 100. In 2020, the profit margin is 3.19%, and 2019 only obtained about 2.81%. The higher of operating profit margin is more favorable than a lower profit margin. A higher operating profit margin show that the company able to pay for their fixed costs and interest on debt. Some more, the high operating profit margin is say more competitive because the company can offer lower prices than the competition. So for the third is net profit margin. Net profit margin are calculated by net income divided by sales and times 100. In 2020, the Dialog Group obtained about 28.14%, which is the higher compared to 2019. The higher net profit margin significantly give the good impact to the company, which is there are result on efficient management and lower cost in expenses, while the low net profit margin result on inefficient of company management and high cost of expenses. Profitability computation is return on asset, or the short form is ROA. ROA is an indicator of how profitable a company is relative to its total asset. The formula for ROA is net income divided by total sale and times 100. In 2020, Dialog Group obtained 9% of ROA, which means that the high return on asset indicate that the Dialog company have more asset efficiency compared to 2019, which is only 8% of ROA. Okay, for the last is return on equity. On equity, the formula is net income divided by the shareholders' equity and times with 100. To get the shareholders, we also need to calculate total asset minus total liability so that we can know the amount of the shareholders' equity. A high return on equity is more successful to generate cash internally. Generally, the higher return on equity ratio, the better a company. Investors are always looking for companies that with high and growing returns on equity. Thus, Dialog Group show the high return on equity in the year of 2020, which is 15.57%. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Sahira Razali. I will present about the analysis of the Dialog Group Berhad and the conclusion. Okay, first for the in terms of efficiency ratio, the Dialog Group Berhad in inventory turnover is low turnover. That shows a weak sales and excess event. In 2019, it's 19.68 times weaker compared to 2020, which is 21.09 times. Okay, for the average collection period, it's a low average collection period, shows that the company is collecting the payment faster, which is in 2020 is 102.66 days compared to 2019 it's 141.81 days. Okay, for the total asset turnover, the higher asset turnover ratio is the better of the performance of the company. in 2019, which is 0.36 times compared to performance in 2020, which is 0.32 times. For the receivable turnover, to compare with 2019 is 2.57 times. The efficiency in 2020, which is 3.56 times. So the fixed asset turnover is the higher the turnover rate, the higher the management efficiency of fixed asset investment. Therefore, compared with 2020 is 1.77 times, and the fixed assets management efficiency in 2019 is 1.83 times. Okay, second, in the term of liquidity ratio, for a quick ratio, is the higher the quick ratio, the more advantageous, because this means that the business must pay off its short-term debt without having a relay on inventory, sales and prepayments. Compared to 2019, is 1.43, and 2020 show the better improvement in debt repayment, which is 1.63. For the cash ratio, the higher in the cash ratio is more advantageous. This is because it means that the company can repay all current liabilities immediately without to need to sell or liquidate other assets. Okay, for the comparison is 2019 is 0.60, and this is show the improvement better in 2020, which is 0.84. Okay, for profitability ratio, in terms of gross profit margin, it show that the Dialog Group Berhad has a higher gross profit in 2020, which is the gross profit margin in 2020 is 22%, while the gross profit margin in 2019 is approximately to 21%. Okay, for the operating profit margin, therefore compared to 2019 is 2.81%, and in 2020 is 3.19%. It's more it is more favorable. Okay, for the net profit margin in the company is compared to 3.14% in 2019. Then the net profit margin in 2020 is to 8.14%. The higher net profit margin means that the company can efficiently control costs and provide goods or services at prices significantly higher than cost. For the return on asset, okay, it's measure of the profitability of a company in the relation to its total assets. ROA is shown that percent, the higher of the ROA, the longer the company can survive. Compared to 2019, 8%, and for 2020 is higher, 9%. Okay, for the last is return on equity, which is a higher return on equity is more successful in generating cash internally. For compare with 2019 is 14.13%. The Dialog Group achieves sustainable growth in 2020, which is 15.57%. In terms of the leverage, the Dialog Group Berhad has a debt ratio of 11.77% in 2019, and the percent proceed immediately to 9.33% in 2020. Okay, it means that the firm has less liabilities in 2020 compared to 2019. Okay, for the debt to equity ratio, it's declined from to 0.22% in 2019 to 15.81% in 2020. Okay, for the time interest earned in company in 2020 is 13.89 times, which is higher than 2019, which is 13.5. Okay, then for the summary on company performance, as a potential investor, Dialog Group Berhad is the best choice to invest for years to come. It's evidenced by their performance for 2 years, namely 2019 and 2020, which is the result of an increase. Okay, a company liquidity decline over the 2 years, indicating that the ability of businesses to pay their debt using their assets is high. This means that the business may not experience the tight liquidity that makes cash tied up in non-liquid assets. Okay, plus the analysis of debt of business show a low ratio where businesses currently have less debt, and loan where an increase indicates that the company's total liabilities are less than their total asset. Okay, lastly, the performance of the business in terms of profitability is so convincing, as the net profit margin for the last year show an increase from the previous years, which indicates that the business is earning more profit from year to years.
Next, we move on to the suggestion and improvement. There are 2 ratios that should be concerned by Dialog Group. This is because it shows bad performance compared to 2019. These ratios are both in efficiency ratio. Firstly is total asset turnover. It defines the capability of the company to produce revenue from their assets. It can be done by comparing the net sales of the company with the total assets. It shows that the higher the asset turnover ratio, the better the performance of the company. Thus, Dialog Group show low performance in 2020 compared to 2019. The total asset turnover is decreasing by 0.04 times. One of the way to improve it is by increased revenue. In order to increase the revenue, the company can make more promotions to attract the customers and also by the quick movement of finished goods. The company also make actively advertise their products so that the products can be introduced to more people. Next is provide better inventory management. The company need to check its inventory management so that they can observe the time spent in the movement of the stock during process. The inventory checking should be done from time to time. The one who is in charge of the inventory need to report it to the management so that the relevant action can be taken. Next, the improvement should be made on fixed asset turnover. The fixed asset turnover ratio measures how well a company uses its fixed asset to generate sales. It can be calculated by dividing net sales by the net of its property, plant, and equipment. A high ratio shows the company managed to efficiently use its fixed asset to generate sales, while low ratio shows that the company is not efficient enough in using its fixed asset to produce sales. In order to improve the fixed asset turnover ratio, the company may liquidate its asset. It means that the unused asset should be liquidated. The company may analyze first whether the asset should be retained or not and make decision. The unused asset may cost the company for the expenses. Thus, by liquidating it, we reduce the company's burden. Lastly is leasing. It is an efficient way to lease assets compared to buying them. This is because any leased equipment is not counted as a fixed asset. Thus, it will not interrupt the calculation of fixed asset.
Okay, for the conclusion, overall, as a large company, Dialog Group Berhad Malaysia has shown an incredible performance because it has not continued to decline or improve. Liquidity, efficiency, leverage, and the earning ratio are important component of the relationship between supplier and investor and the company. Okay, this analysis can help investor determine if they choose to invest in Dialog Group Berhad, because the purpose of the investment is to make a profit if they can get a higher return on investment. Okay, then last, the analysis of the financial statement of Dialog Group Berhad show that the performance of the past years was positive, not negative.